Have you ever been in a conversation where someone says, the problem with Christianity? It's just too narrow and restrictive. I mean, it has so many rules. Everyone has to think alike and act alike. It restricts personal freedom and limits personal choice. I've heard this a lot. So I've come up with kind of a standard response that kind of relaxes everything because remember, our goal is never to win arguments, but to win people. So I usually say something like this. Yeah, it's true. Christianity can be kind of narrow and restrictive. But then I add this, which is the first point. Every community creates narrow and restrictive boundaries. It's just how life works. I mean, think about it for a minute. If you work for Pepsi, you're not going to be drinking Coca-Cola products. It just won't be good for your future. If you're a salesman with Ford, you're not going to be driving Chevys or GMCs. Maybe they won't tell you can't, but you know it is not good for your future, so you're restricted. If you're part of a macho man group, it's going to affect how you dress. It's going to affect your hobbies. You're probably not going to be doing any cross stitching. We allow people we're around, our subculture, so to speak, to restrict how we think, how we live, and how we believe all the time. So Christianity is not unique in this. It's true in all of life. But here's the second point. Love always restricts freedom. If you're a parent, you know this to be true. You restrict what your kids eat. You restrict what they watch. You restrict what social media they get exposed to, the people they hang around with. Why is this? Because you love them, because you have a vested interest in them. So because of that, you restrict some of their freedoms because you want them to have a good life. Think of marriage. Marriage itself is very restrictive. When I got married almost 50 years ago, I had to give all my commitment to just one woman out of all the millions of women in the world. Not really that any of them were that interested in me, but it sounds good. I had to restrict myself to just one. I was with a guy this morning who'd been married only 6 months, and he was telling me that he used to have season tickets to his pro football team, which, as you know, it's not cheap. But he was telling me that since he got married, he's given up those because they want to spend their money on other things. He was restricted, but it was a restriction motivated by love. This is what God does. Because God loves us, He wants our best. So He puts some restrictions on us for our good so we don't get hurt and we can experience the best life possible. And here's the third point. Christianity allows the most freedom for embracing other cultures. Now, you may not have thought much about this, so let me tell you what I mean. Most religions' cultural practices are counter to other cultures in the world. That's because most religions are still in the culture of their origin. I mean, the majority of the Islam population is still in the Middle East where it started. And they have narrow and restrictive behaviors that control that culture because they're part of the religion, the way they dress, the way they eat, their daily schedule. These cultural things are all part of the religion. If Muslims move to a different culture, another part of the world, many of them keep some of the same cultural practices, the way they dress, the way they eat, because it's intertwined with their religion, even though it's counter to the culture they've moved into. The greatest population of Hindus and Buddhists is still in the same geographic area as it was started. And they have narrow and restrictive practices that are part of the religion, but it controls the culture. If they move to a different part of the world, Muslims keep these same cultural practices because it's part of the religion, but in reality, it's out of step with their new culture. But now think about Christianity. It started in the Middle East, in Israel. It was Jewish. Yet today, the greatest concentration of Christians is not in Israel, but it's in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia. Christianity is way less restrictive because it's not connected to a culture. So Christians can live in and embrace nearly any culture of the world. I've been in many parts of the world, and Christianity looks so different because it doesn't have a certain culture that it has to embrace. It's centered on a very personal relationship with Jesus that happens inside of a person. And because of that, it can blend with any culture without restrictions. Now, remember what we always say, and that's that our goal is not just to answer questions, but to help people think a little bit and to open up an opportunity to be able to share the gospel. So about now, I'd probably say something like, you may not understand the real core of Christianity, how it's unrelated to culture. If you have a few minutes, I can show you what that is so at least you can know the difference. Remember, the goal is the gospel. So I encourage you, answer questions clearly and simply, but never make that your goal, because it's the gospel alone that can change a person's life forever.